So what we're going to do today is go over some of the basic characteristics of a few different groups of protists and talk about how we sort of categorize some of them. So remember, in the protist kingdom, it's just sort of a catch-all with things that don't fit in plants or animals or fungi, but they do have a nucleus, then they are put into the protist kingdom. Okay? And so we're going to talk about four sort of subgroups of protists, and it's based on how they move. There's four groups that we talk about: the amoeboids, the ciliates, the flagellates, and sporozoans. The amoeboids are a group of protists which move using something called pseudopods. Pseudo means false or fake. The root pod, like a podiatrist, a doctor that works with feet. So pseudopod means false feet. And the amoeboids move by sort of sending forth their cytoplasm, sort of oozing forward, and then pulling the rest of them along. They have a very flexible cell membrane. They sort of ooze around. Okay? They glob around through the water. The one we look at is called the amoeba. There's different varieties of amoeba. We're just going to call them amoeba. Kimberly? What's that? I don't know, maybe. All right, ciliates. Ciliates move using tiny little projections, tiny little hairs that are called cilia. Oh, this is the amoeba, and you can see it's got, these are the pseudopods, these sort of blobs oozing forward, and shape is always changing. The ciliates move using cilia, which are these tiny little hairs on the outside of the cell membrane that move in unison, paddling through the water. You can kind of see them moving along the side of this cilia. And the one we're going to look at is called the Paramecium. This is what they look like. Kind of this, they're slipper shaped, is the way they're referred to lots of times. Kind of like a torpedo or something. So those are the ciliates. Then we have flagellates. Flagellates move with flagellum. You know what a flagellum is? It's a tail. It's a whip-like tail is how we often describe it. A whip-like tail. The one we're going to look at that's a flagellate is euglena. You can see here's a euglena, and you can see the flagellum at the end, a tail that moves it through the water. Then the last group are the sporozoans. They don't really move on their own. And some of these are actually parasites. And next week we'll be talking about one very important sporozoan that is responsible for the illness and death of millions of people throughout the world. It's a disease you've heard of, I know. Yeah, malaria. Okay, you've heard of malaria. It's caused by a protist called Plasmodium. And we'll be talking about malaria next week. It's a protist that attacks blood cells and causes people to become very ill. So those are our groups of protists. We're going to now talk a little bit more detail about them and talk about some of the important parts that we should know. Then on Tuesday we'll label some parts and the organelles of these protists, and then you're going to make some drawings. Yeah, that's why you need your colored pencils. So the amoeboids. So the amoeboids are, like I said, are very flexible in terms of their cell membrane. Their cytoplasm oozes forward to move around, but also to ingest materials. Okay? They sort of blob along, and when they do find a food particle that they're going to eat, they just kind of ooze around it and surround it with their cytoplasm, engulfing it. In this little video here, you could see a pseudopod sort of oozing forward from an amoeba. So the cytoplasm, you could say, just sort of streams through there and it moves around. So when we think about the amoeba, the parts that we need to know are the pseudopods, the false feet that are used for movement and ingestion of food. And now once a food particle is engulfed by the amoeba, where is that food particle now? It's inside of the amoeba. And in that, what we call then is a food vacuole. Okay? That stores the food, and then eventually the amoeba will create digestive enzymes into that food vacuole that will break down the food so that the amoeba can actually use the nutrients from that for energy. And amoeba, and also the other protists we're going to talk about, also have an organelle that we've mentioned before, the contractile vacuole. We talked about it way back when we talked about osmosis. Does anybody remember what a contractile vacuole does? Freshwater protists need a contractile vacuole.
It like controls how much water.
Yeah, it controls and pumps out excess water. Because remember, due to osmosis, protists that live in fresh water constantly have water flowing into them. So to prevent them from swelling up and bursting, they need something to get rid of that excess water, and that's the contractile vacuole. Often they look like a star.
The contractile vacuoles of ciliates are permanent structures that periodically squeeze excess water out through a tiny pore. In some Paramecium species, the contractile vacuoles have conspicuous feeder arms, but in most ciliates, the canal system is less apparent, and the contractile vacuole appears as a simple sphere.
And so it just pumps that water out. Sometimes they have that star shape. Those arms bring water in. Other times it just looks like a little vacuole and it squeezes the water out when necessary. This last video clip's really neat. This shows you how an amoeba, we'll just watch. This is the amoeba. It kind of looks like a giraffe, but its shape is changing. And sort of checking out this amoeba is another protist. Which one was that? That's a Paramecium.
Why is it coming to
I just sort of, I don't know, checking out this amoeba. Trying to figure out if it's something edible or not.
Wait, is this like a little scary?
No.
Wait, so it really moves that fast?
The Paramecium? Yeah. The amoeba moves fairly slowly, but it moves, you can see that it's moving. You can see the pseudopods sort of elongating there.
It's moving
To engulf the Paramecium.
Is the Paramecium moving the amoeba?
No.
Why is it going inside?
What is it doing?
Yeah, let's get eaten.
It's like eating.
Are these things smart?
No, they're single-celled organisms. They have no, they're just a cell.
No brain.
What are they trying to do?
Dig it up.
Oh, we're gonna eat it? Oh my god.
So again, you see this now, amoeba has engulfed, or it's almost totally engulfed this Paramecium by surrounding it with its pseudopods. Now the video doesn't continue as long as I'd like, but these pseudopods eventually merge together. And then where is this Paramecium? Inside of it, in a food vacuole. Eventually it would be broken down and digested and used for nutrients. Hello? Yes. Rosemary, what was the first period in class? In study hall, she said?
It's just like an awkward news.
Were you late? No? Okay. So that's the amoeba. The ciliates. The ciliates are another group. They move using these hairs called cilia. They sort of paddle the Paramecium around through the water. And the one we're going to look at is Paramecium. And Paramecia are sort of shaped like a shoe. Yeah, that's the one we just saw. That's what got eaten by the amoeba. And they are not flexible like the amoeba. They have this hard outer covering called a pellicle. This pellicle is sort of like a shell around it. So they can't engulf their food like an amoeba. So they have this indentation. It's kind of like their mouth. It's called the oral groove. And that's how they ingest food. Cilia and the oral groove sort of paddle in food particles. They go into the oral groove, down a tube called the gullet, into a food vacuole. And that's where it can be digested. They also have an organelle to help them get rid of waste. You probably can guess that from the name. It's called the anal pore. And so Paramecium move, they sort of swim through the raw water like this in a spiraling pattern. So as they're swimming, they're sort of twisting around at the same time. You could see the indentation of the oral groove
Is
as
it
this.
stuck in something?
Yeah, it's in like a kind of liquid that's very thick, so it can't swim very fast. Just helps you see them a little bit easier. Okay, our last group, flagellates. These move by a flagellum or whip-like tail. We're going to look at Euglena, is the flagellum of flagellate that we'll look at. And they're interesting because they can make their own food through photosynthesis, or they can eat things. So they're both autotrophic and heterotrophic. They have a flagellum, a tail for moving, and chloroplasts for photosynthesis.
Where would they get?
They find it, and they have this eye spot, this organelle that is sensitive to light, so that they can go to an area with light for photosynthesis. And that's what a euglena looks like, kind of like a pickle being pulled through the water. All right, guys, have a good weekend. Enjoy your day off Monday. Bring your colored pencils on.